Okay, so let's dive in. Today we're getting into the personal side of Ludwig van Beethoven.
That's right. We're using a discussion from Popular Beethoven magazine, and it leans heavily on Marion Scott's biography, really trying to get behind the music.
Yeah, looking at like his daily routine, how he dealt with people, family, friends especially, as his hearing got worse.
Exactly. It's about understanding the man. What was he actually like day to day?
Right. So the goal here is to pull out the key stuff from this source to kind of give you a picture of the human behind the symphonies.
Mm.
First off, his private world, habits, living situation.
Well, what Scott's biography points out, according to the magazine discussion, is this really stark contrast. You have this composer incredibly meticulous with his music.
Yeah, total order in the scores.
Right. But his living space, apparently just absolute chaos. The source calls it frightful confusion, papers, clothes, dust, broken furniture maybe, just
the
everywhere.
And that story about him pouring water over his hands while composing, to the point of flooding the rooms below. That's pretty intense.
It really suggests, doesn't it, that his focus was just so internal, like the outside world, comfort, tidiness. It barely mattered when the music took over.
Hmm.
His bed was supposedly really hard, like military style, not much furniture. But then, oddly, he was quite fussy about needing bright, airy places with nice views. Hated looking onto cramped courtyards.
So messy, but needed light and air. And wasn't he always moving house, too? The source says he'd sometimes rent like multiple apartments at once.
Yeah, constantly moving. Was it just eccentricity? Or maybe, like you said, that restless energy we hear in the music spilling out into his life? It's an interesting thought.
Definitely. But his connection to nature wasn't restless, was it? That seemed crucial.
Oh, absolutely essential. The long walks, sketching ideas outdoors, the magazine piece really stresses this, vital for his process. His hygiene could be okay in the morning, apparently, but then the water pouring incidents, it shows how his inner state just dictated everything, sometimes ignoring basic needs like regular meals or, not flooding the neighbors.
Yeah, art absolutely came first, which must have affected his relationships. Let's shift to that. His social life sounds just as complicated from the source.
Totally. A real mix. Quick temper, impatient, could be pretty blunt.
Rude, even.
Yeah, sometimes. But also capable of real warmth and deep loyalty. The source suggests his loudness, the crude jokes sometimes. That was partly the deafness. You couldn't gauge his own volume.
Ah, right. That makes sense. And the deafness itself. I mean, the conversation books.
Yeah, those notebooks where people had to write things down for him. The discussion calls them a pitiful but also fascinating window into his isolation. Just the sheer effort to communicate.
It really highlights the struggle.
It does. But here's the thing. Despite all that, the temper, the deafness, he still had this charisma. Women were often drawn to him, apparently. That rebellious streak was part of the attraction.
That tension, the difficult side versus the connection,
Mm-hmm.
it really explodes in his family life, doesn't it? Especially with Carl, his nephew.
Oh, absolutely. That's maybe the most intense part, according to the source. After his brother died, Beethoven fought tooth and nail for custody of Carl. He couldn't stand the boy's mother.
He really wanted to be a father figure.
Desperately. But it became, well, completely overwhelming, possessive, controlling. He loved Carl intensely, but it kind of suffocated him.
And there's that quote in the source from a letter. It's so raw.
Yeah.
About dreaming only of Carl and wanting nothing to do with the rest of the abominable family. It's actually quite sad.
It really shows the depth of his feeling, but also how damaging it was. Carl eventually rebelled, tried to take his own life. The source says that just devastated Beethoven in his last years.
Wow. And his brothers, too, the relationship sound pretty spiky. Nicknames, harsh jokes, back and forth.
He could definitely give as good as he got there. But contrast that with his friendships, especially certain loyal friends, patrons like the Brunings or Prince Lichnowsky.
Even after he called Lichnowsky an ass.
Yeah, exactly. They put up with a lot. They offered money, support, and his friendships with women often seemed more about platonic affection, empathy, a different dynamic from the family turmoil.
Okay, so pulling this all together. The genius living in chaos, the difficult friend who was also loyal, the loving but controlling uncle.
Oh.
What does this magazine discussion, this dive into Scott's biography, really tell us about creativity and personal life?
I think it shows pretty vividly that for Beethoven, his life's messiness, his struggles, they weren't separate from his art. They were tangled up in it. The deafness, the difficult relationships, maybe they weren't just hurdles. Maybe they were part of the fuel.
Right. Which leaves us for the final thought for you listening. Given how much Beethoven's personal battles, especially the deafness, that whole situation with Carl seemed baked into his later life and, arguably, his most profound music, What does this really intimate look suggest about the, I guess, the cost of genius? Or maybe even the source of it? Something to think about.